Who is Cain's wife? And what about Adam and Eve's other daughters? Let's find out in today's Bible Storyteller. Hey everyone, it's me. Join me as we read and learn from God's Word. Now, in today's episode, let us look at some interesting facts that we should know about Cain's wife and Adam and Eve's other daughters. But before we get into it, please remember to support us by subscribing and sharing this video with your friends. Also, don't forget to press the bell icon to be notified whenever we upload new videos. Now let's dive right in. And if Adam and Eve had 5 daughters and 1 son, then Cain married one of his half-sisters. Regardless of who she was, what we can be sure of is that she didn't come from another family, because at the time, Adam and Eve were the only couple in existence. But why did Cain need to marry his sister or niece? Well, the answer is simple. It was God's will. Unfortunately, the Bible doesn't provide us with their names. However, it does say that they existed, and that's very important. Many people believe that only Adam and Eve had Seth, Cain and Abel, forgetting that there were other daughters, and that he lived in a place far away from where Adam and Eve lived. They had an important role in the development of the human race. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts with us in our community. And as usual, if you want to go deeper into the subject, check out the links in the description where you'll find selected videos, articles, and scriptures that will help you discover more about God's Word. Please remember to like and share this video. May the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob bless you abundantly. Until next time. And along with their brothers, they helped populate the earth and establish the first families and communities. And even though Adam and Eve's story ended tragically with their expulsion from the garden, God continued his plan of salvation through Seth and his descendants. And this plan wouldn't have been possible if it weren't for the other daughters of Adam and Eve, who are remembered in Genesis chapter 5 verse 4. But let's pay attention to this detail. In Genesis 4:16, it states that Cain was banished from the presence of the Lord, and he built a city. But wait a minute, if he was far away from where Adam and Eve were, how could he build a city with his family? Well, the truth is that the Bible doesn't say that he was very far away, just that he was banished from the presence of the Lord. Furthermore, we read in verse 26, "Then to Cain he said, 'The Lord has set a mark on you so that no one who finds you will kill you.' And so the Lord drove the man out. He settled in the land of Nod east of Eden. So even though he was banished, he still had access to other people. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to marry. And he didn't live too far away, because if he had, he wouldn't have been able to visit and communicate with his family. However, the Bible clearly states that there were others. And if we remember, at the time when Cain killed Abel, he asked God, "Am I my brother's keeper? That is, am I responsible for him?" And God responded, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground." So both Adam and Eve had other daughters and sons, and they likely had a significant role in establishing the first families and communities. As you probably already know, Adam and Eve had 3 children named Cain, Abel, and Seth. In Jude, verse 14, it states, "And Enoch, the 7th from Adam, prophesied about these, saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000 of his saints." Now if you count the generations from Adam to Christ, starting with Adam, Cain, Seth, Enosh, Kenan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, and Methuselah, plus the additional 3 mentioned in 1 Chronicles, you'll notice that it totals exactly 10 people. This would mean that there were other people mentioned in this genealogy, but they are not included in the Bible. What's the reason for this? Well, perhaps it is because they lived during the time before the flood and their records were lost due to the flood itself. But nevertheless, we can be sure that God kept track of them and of the righteous people who existed even before the flood. When we look at the lineage of Jesus in Matthew chapter 1, verses 2 to 17, we see that there's a list of names. It's a long list, isn't it? But what if we focus on the first few names? We have Shem, Ham, and Japheth, who were Noah's sons. Then we have Arphaxad, who is Shem's son. And then we have Salah, who was Arphaxad's son. But what about the descendants of Ham and Japheth? Why doesn't the Bible mention them in the lineage of Jesus? Could it be that they had no descendants? No, definitely not. There must be a reason why they weren't included in the genealogy. And have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the birds of the heavens and everything that moves on the earth. Well, this is precisely what happened later. when laws were established prohibiting marriage between relatives. For example, Leviticus 18:6 states, "You shall not lie with any of your relatives during the night." So when did these laws begin? Interestingly, they began with Moses. Deuteronomy 27:20 says, "Cursed is he who does any of these abominations, and all the people shall curse him." And then it lists the abominations, including lying with a relative. Therefore, before Moses' time, these types of marriages were allowed, and so they began to have children, sons and daughters. You see, in Leviticus 18:11 it states, "A daughter has no preference for her father's house. His daughter may marry his brother." That is, if they were to have children, those children would not have any genetic problems. They would be just as healthy as children born of unrelated parents. So based on this passage, it's clear that God commanded them to multiply, which would not have been possible if they had no children. And how could they have more than one set of parents? Well, they couldn't. Therefore, it was essential that the first marriage involved a man and a woman who were siblings. You see, if we read Genesis 4:17, we find that Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and lived in the land of Nod, where he built a city and settled down to have a wife. Now, there's a very interesting detail here because the text says he married a wife. In Hebrew, the word for wife is ish. The interesting thing is that in Genesis 2:22, when God made a helper suitable for Adam, he also said, "For this reason, a man will leave his father and mother and be united to his wife, and they will become one flesh." So from this passage, we understand that the woman who became Adam's wife was called Isha, which means woman. However, when talking about wives, it says Isha plural. So based on the fact that Adam had other daughters, it's possible that Cain married one of his sisters, since at that time only two people existed, Adam and Eve. This is something that we learn from the 3rd chapter of Genesis. "My offspring will never again be cut off through the flood, as in the days of Noah, nor will there ever again be a world." Now, the name Seth means appointed, placed, or compensation. So what's the connection between having a compensation and having a sister for Cain? Well, when we compare this verse with Genesis chapter 4, we see that there's a numerical inconsistency. In Genesis 4, Adam had 3 children, but in 1 Chronicles, we see that Adam had 4 children. That's Seth and 3 others whose names aren't mentioned. Now, considering that at that time there were only Adam and Eve, it's clear that Seth would have been the 4th child. But what happened to the other 3 children? It's highly probable that those 3 are the same ones listed in Genesis chapter 5, verse 4, who are mentioned as being brothers of Seth and as Adam's sons and daughters. Therefore, it's quite possible that Cain married one of his sisters. But it could also be that he married his niece, that is a daughter of Adam and Eve. However, if we turn to the 5th chapter of Genesis, we see something quite interesting. In Genesis 5-4, it states, "The days of Adam, the first man, were 930 years. He had other sons and daughters besides Cain, Abel, and Seth." So this raises an important question. Who were these other daughters of Adam and Eve? Now, let's start by looking at who Cain's wife was. In fact, we can find another indication of this in 1 Chronicles 1-1, which states that Adam had a son named Seth, to whom God said. You see, if Adam and Eve had a total of 6 children, it would mean that their firstborn, Cain, married his full sister. If we remember, in Genesis chapter 1 verse 28, God said to Adam and Eve, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth and subdue it." But why wasn't this prohibited? Why could they marry their sister or brother? Another interesting point is that although it was necessary for Cain and his wife to be relatives, it wasn't necessarily a disadvantage. Now, going back to our main topic, who were Adam and Eve's other daughters? Now, you might be wondering, if there were other people at the time, why doesn't the Bible talk about them? And let me show you another passage. Now, regarding Cain's story, some people believe that after killing his brother Abel, God exiled him from the Garden of Eden. Therefore, despite the fact that Adam and Eve's other daughters aren't named in the Bible, we know that they existed. So what do you think? What other details do you know about Adam and Eve's other daughters?